And today I received a very interesting message from Bruce Dixon, the editor at Black Agenda Report. Bruce told me some really disturbing things about some things that are going on at the Jackson State Correctional Facility down in Georgia. He told me that there are inmates that have been, from what I understand, put in solitary confinement for 18 months since the prison strike back in 2010. And what's really interesting is that this is the same facility where Troy Davis was executed. And, you know, basically the men who've been in this confinement, who've been isolated, are now on a hunger strike. And they're basically in a position where they feel they have nothing to lose. And to some extent, we're kind of their only hope. So to talk about some of this and to really kind of highlight the spotlight that needs to be put on what's going on here, I wanted to talk to Yvette Carnell about this. First of all, I want to ask Yvette, how are you today?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well, very well. Now, what do you think about this? I mean, you know, it seems to me that when it comes to prison, people seem to think that anything goes, that if you break the law and they do horrible things to you, then you deserve it because you broke the law. What is wrong with that rationale?
What's wrong with that rationale is that that's called torture. And you're not allowed to torture people in prison. There's a thing called cruel and inhumane punishment, and you're not allowed to do that. That's what's wrong with it. You know, the rationale behind putting people in jail is that, A, this person is dangerous to society and this person should be taken off the street. It's not meant to be some sort of torture chamber for you to just get your jollies off and do whatever you feel like doing to other people. And that's what's wrong with this. You have people, you had a congressional hearing last week on whether or not solitary confinement is torture, because these people don't have any human contact. And what looks like what's happening here is that this is retribution against these men. This is punishment for whether it's activism or speaking out about the prison conditions. This amounts to torture, plain and simple.
Well, you know, it's interesting when you put this in the context of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look at the images of the individuals who have been punished and who've been tortured, who were connected to the protest, all of them are African Americans. All of them are African American men. I mean, you really have this farm of black men that have been hauled away from the black community to these prison camps. And it's probably one of the most disgusting and insidious things in our society today. And I think that the way that they keep us from becoming outraged about this is they say, hey, look, this isn't about you. This is about the criminals. And incarceration is interesting. It's really one of those things where you don't understand the devastation of incarceration until you've gone through it up close. If you haven't had a relative who's been in prison, if you haven't been in prison, if you haven't interacted with the criminal justice system, you just don't get it. You want to believe the bullshit, excuse my French, and I reserve that word for situations that call for it. You want to buy into the BS that tells you that you have nothing to do with those other people. And what people forget is that that's kind of the same tactic that was used, during the Holocaust. Like, oh, well, we're just doing it to those people, so this has nothing to do with you. When Joseph Stalin in communist Russia was hauling people away to the labor camps so that he could get free labor, that was the argument people used. People would say, well, that's not you. You're not a criminal. And then what happens is eventually they close in on you, and then you realize that term criminal can end up being very arbitrary, especially in our justice system, where justice tends to be reserved for people who have money.
No, you're exactly right. Justice is reserved for people who have money, and people who go to prison. People who go to prison a lot of times are tortured. There was a story a couple of weeks ago about female prisoners who were being raped by male guards. They're just using the prison as their personal brothel. As their personal. I don't want to call it a prostitute. I'm just going to sleep with the women. I'm just going to rape these women. So once you go to prison, you are at the will of whoever your guard is. And now you have private prisons also who make money by feeding you less. Like, they get paid more money the less food they feed you. This is what we have. I don't see how that kind of treatment, how those kinds of incentives and profits and privatization, when you have that mixed, it's like a deadly storm. And especially when you have a lot of these people who get off on this kind of stuff. I mean, we don't really talk about the psychological makeup of a lot of these guards who really feel like they're doing a good thing by torturing these prisoners. Well, you did something wrong, so I have a right to do this. No, you're supposed to guard them and make sure they don't get out, don't hurt another prisoner, don't hurt themselves. That's your job. Outside of that, you're not paid as a torturer. We don't live in those ages where kings paid their henchmen to torture people. So this whole prison culture is just one of the most dastardly and insidious things to come in the 21st century. It's not even a modern thing. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like something antiquated, something from the days of yore, like 1600s.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. It's a horrific form of racism. It's really one of the worst types of racism that exists in our society. Where we, especially during the war on drugs, we're giving these individuals, mostly black males, these insane sentences, 100 years. Nobody even thinks about whether this person can be redeemed. They don't care about what happens to their families. They don't care about the fact that we're even hurting our society by creating more criminals, by incarcerating so many people. Because guess what? When that guy goes to prison and he's got 4 or 5 kids and those kids grow up without a father, well, guess what? The chances that those kids grow up and end up becoming criminals or whatever the case may be is much higher. Now, to give you some details on what's going on down in Georgia, the Black Agenda Report talks about this in good detail, and they say that basically in 2010 there was a protest, and I do remember that, and I supported these guys at that time. They demanded some things that I think are quite reasonable. They wanted wages for their work. They don't want to get paid $1 a day to do a job that would pay them $30, $40 an hour on the outside world. That's how corporations end up making a huge profit, is by using prison labor. And guess what? When corporations are trying to make their money, and I'm speaking as a finance professor here, so I know how capitalism works. You get an incentive to incarcerate more people because then you have more cheap labor, which maximizes your profits. The number one goal in Capitalism 101 is profit maximization and maximizing shareholder wealth. So they will incarcerate people unnecessarily in order to increase their profits. That's what they're lobbying for in Washington right now. And guess who gets incarcerated? Black and brown people. Your family members, etc. So some other things they were demanding was they wanted wages for their work. They wanted speedier, more transparent status reviews, decent food, real medical care, a more sane visitation policy, and of the availability of educational and vocational programs. Now, I don't understand why we would not want incarcerated individuals to get access to an education unless somehow we want them to come back to prison. Why not give them an opportunity to redeem themselves if they are in fact redeemable? Now, I am a person that can understand, punishment as much as anybody else. I mean, you got people out here that do horrible, heinous things, and they need to be punished for what they did. And some people need to just be locked up. But you got a lot of people out here who make mistakes when they're young. Look, I was poor. My family, we weren't getting by. I wasn't a good student in school, or my school sucked. So I went to selling drugs so that I could provide for my family. I understand that because that mentality is one that I would adopt if I were in that situation. Well, that person, maybe if they had other options and other alternatives, they would make different choices. So why not position them in prison to have different choices? So the way we go about incarcerating people and the way we go about dealing with the incarcerated is absolutely ridiculous, and ultimately it's going to destroy our society.
Oh, I agree with you, but it's not ridiculous when you look at it in terms of what they want. They really want to use this as a corporations are always looking for ways. That's how slavery happened. Corporations are always looking for ways to get free labor. Prison is the best way for them to do that now. Slavery, as it is illegal. You can pay minimum wage, which is almost slavery as far as I'm concerned, but you can't just not pay people. But prison is the best way for you to do that. And there's no excuse for not paying people. You don't have to pay that person directly. You can say, well, we're just going to give this money to your heir, to your kids, or if you have a wife, or if you have a mother. If you want to say the prisoner can't get the money, you can give the money to the family. That way, the family who has lost a father, who has lost a husband or a boyfriend or a son, get some money. Because you got to think that family is also transporting themselves back and forth to the prison to go and see the prisoner, and that sort of thing. So that will help the family out. And you would think if you wanted to do the right thing by the family, you would want to have them to have money, because they're in a bad position. But that's not what they want. They want free labor. They want to punish these people. They want to hurt these people. That's what they're about. So when you look at what they really do and what kind of Western society, especially American society, when you look at our history of slavery and how diabolical this whole thing has been to black people, it's no surprise. What's happening to prisoners right now is no surprise, and it shouldn't be a surprise. The only question is, what do we do?
Mm-hmm. And I agree. Let me read a little bit from this an excerpt from Black Agenda Report about what's going on down in Jackson, Georgia right now. One of the strikers, his name is Miguel Jackson. He was taken in handcuffs from his cell at Smith State Prison 18 months ago. He was removed to a secluded area out of range of the video cameras that monitor almost every inch of most Georgia prisons and beaten with a hammer-like object. Jackson is one of several brutalized prisoners whose injuries have been untreated since 2010. Despite a blizzard of demands by his attorneys, prison officials have refused Jackson and other prisoners medical attention for months. And although they have not eaten in 2 weeks, Jackson's wife said at the 9-day mark, when medical necessity usually demands prisoners be removed to the infirmary, prison officials simply told Jackson, "You are going to die." This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. I think that those of us who do care, we have to accept the fact that there are going to be some people who just don't care. I was on a radio station in Georgia last week, and I was talking about mass incarceration, the fact that the United States incarcerates more of its citizens than any country in the world. Most of those citizens are black and brown people. The United Nations has cited us for gross human rights violations for the way we run our prison systems, our educational systems, and our economic systems, where there's this massive inequality where even a black president can't do anything about it. And I remember when I was on the radio in Georgia, there was a woman who simply said, "I don't care about prison inmates. I don't care about drug dealers. I don't care about their families. I don't care about their babies. It doesn't matter to me." And I told her, I said, "Well, if you care nothing about the babies of drug dealers, then God rest your soul. God help you. Because you ain't sounding like a Christian right now." I think those of us who do care, about just making some sense out of the system, creating a productive community and a productive society, I encourage you to get behind what's going on down, at these facilities and have some degree of compassion in terms of supporting these men as they simply ask for basic human rights. I think that's the most we can ask. Yvette, I'll let you get the last word, and then we're going to bounce on out of here.
No, I think what you have to understand is what a society does to the least of people, they eventually do to everybody. They eventually extend it. Just like what a society does overseas. You can say, well, they're just dropping drones on Pakistan or whatever. Well, now you saw a drone crash in Maryland. What was it doing in Maryland? What were drones doing on American skies? What the government does to the least of us, they eventually do to all of us. So if you really want to think about it in that way, you're protecting yourself, because what stops this country or law enforcement in this country from just rounding you up and saying, "Hey, you're a criminal," and doing the same thing to you or your son. And there are people in prison who are innocent. The Innocence Project has proved that there are a lot of people in there who haven't done anything. You don't care about the innocent people who are in jail either? I mean, none of that means anything to you? To me, that's the laziest pseudo-intellectual thought you could have, is that I don't care because they did something wrong. You don't care because they sold some cocaine or had a firearms possession or, whatever the case may be. And a lot of these guys were in there since they were teenagers. The funniest thing is when a white kid goes before a judge, he gets a second chance. When a black kid goes before a judge, he gets 20 to 30 to life. So you're looking at a groundswell of unfairness in terms of how these prisoners are treated. And it's not only, let me just say this, it's mostly black men in prison. And that's how it's been done. But you look at Bradley Manning, the WikiLeaks guy, he's been tortured since day one. Rarely had access to attorneys, solitary confinement. You had the president of the United States call him guilty, and he hasn't even been on trial. So when you look at this whole thing about how the prison industrial complex is just swallowing people up and just making people to be guilty and saying, we're going to torture you, we have a right to torture you, and this is how we do things, this is becoming a very dangerous country to be in.
I agree with you 100%. And it's going to become more dangerous if we don't speak up and stand up and fight for what's right. So thank you very much, Yvette, for your time. I truly appreciate it. And thank you all for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.